Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to begin by asking you to check your mobile phones to make sure that they're on silent or turned off during this talk. We are recording it as well, so that would be greatly appreciated. So welcome to today's Stories from the Stacks with Helen Edwards, who's kindly offered to share her insights of her beautifully published book. And her fellowship here with us at the State Library. I would like to take this moment to begin by acknowledging the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of Tandanya, where the State Library of South Australia resides, and we pay our deep respects to all First Nations and language groups across South Australia. As places of memory and learning, libraries have a special responsibility to honour the enduring strength of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, and to work in genuine partnership to preserve and share voices, stories, and knowledge. Dr. Helen Edwards is an award-winning Australian author and a speaker who writes diverse stories of nature, magic, and history. Helen has a PhD in psychology and a long background working in mental health. Her aim is to raise hope through stories. Please welcome Helen.
Thank you, Patrick, for that lovely introduction. Thanks, Patrick, and thanks everyone that's come along to listen to me talking this afternoon and people who are watching on the streaming as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit first about how I became an author and who I am, so you know who is up here talking to you. And then I'm going to go in and tell you about A Light on the Rocks and how I came up with the idea and the book and the time I spent here in the library, as well as delving down into the history behind the two different parts of this book that come together to form the story. So when I go out to schools, I ask people, the children, how old they think I was when I published my first book. So I'm going to ask this audience and see how close you get, see whether or not you can get closer than what the children get. So who would like to have a guess at how old I might have been when I published my first book? Anyone got any ideas? 5. Wow. You are so close. Very close. I was 6. Now, then I say to children, does this look like a book like this? And they go, no. And then I talk about how anyone can publish a book now. You don't have to have a publisher. You can self-publish a book. There's many ways to do that. But that writing, you're a writer because you write. And there's a picture of me up there, up the top corner when I was probably only about 4. And I've got my dad's typewriter, which children don't usually know what that is. And I'm reading a book and writing. And I was reading and writing before I even went to school. And in this book here, which I won the Book Week Prize for, it's written down the bottom by me, published by Helen Wild, which was my maiden name, age 6 years old. So at the age of 6, I was already thinking about being published. So it just took me a very long time to get there. I became a social worker. I fell into social work because I was told that being an author, writing stories was not a career path. I needed to become a journalist if I wanted to write. And I actually became a social worker. So I did a lot of work in the area of child protection work, and then I decided to start a online counselling service for people with diabetes because I've had type 1 diabetes myself since I was 12. So you may hear my insulin pump beeping and I may have to stop and grab a jelly bean because it is lunchtime, but hopefully everything will be smooth sailing. And when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, there wasn't the technology we've got now. I didn't see myself in any stories or any books, except bad ones. Steel Magnolias is a movie, if anyone remembers that actually absolutely killed me because I was told as a 12-year-old that I'd never have children. And if I did, the babies would be born dead or deformed. So that was a lot for a 12-year-old to take on board and carry with me. I'm pleased to announce I have 3 strapping sons. Who you can see they're all much taller now. The youngest one's about to turn 18, so they're all amazingly healthy, wonderful young men. But I still had this yearning to become an author. So during the time that I was running my online counselling service, which became a national charity for people with diabetes, I self-published a picture book for kids with type 1 about a dragon and a dinosaur called Diabetes Dino. And I still had that yearning in me to want to become an author. So when I was finishing my PhD, because that wasn't enough work, I decided that I would do a course on writing for children. And so in 2019, I took the step into doing that. So this is now my 8th year of being a full-time author. And it's my 5th book, and my 6th book's coming out next year. So A Light on the Rocks was part of my fellowship project, as Patrick said. So the State Library offer all sorts of amazing opportunities for authors, grants, fellowships, awards for writers across Australia. And I applied for a fellowship that was supported by Writers SA and was lucky enough to be awarded one of 2 mid-career fellowships last year. So that gave me access to a lot of resources and to be able to come in and get support from the librarians in the library and to do the research I needed to write this book. So there were a number of things that inspired this story. One was the Cape Jaffa Lighthouse, which some of you will probably have visited in Kingston. And one was the SS Admella, which I know some people have come in and already spoken to me about knowing about that shipwreck. And how I came across the 2 things was that I had written a story called Legend of the Lighthouse Moon, which was my first lighthouse story set on Kangaroo Island. And I wanted to write a number of books about Australian lighthouses. So I was looking for my second lighthouse story, and I came across Cape Jaffa. And I thought it was really cool that it was a lighthouse that was out in the middle of the ocean. And so I thought, yeah, that might be my lighthouse. But I was also researching a mystery story that needed a shipwreck in it. And I came across the SS Admella. And finding out that the 2 things happened in quite reasonable close proximity to each other, and that the Cape Jaffa Lighthouse was partly built because of what happened with the SS Admella, I decided that I might be able to tie these 2 stories together. So that was what I applied for with the fellowship. At that stage, I hadn't really started writing the story, and I had it in my head that I was going to have 2 timelines, which it does have, and I was going to have a boy on the SS Admella based on George Ward, who was a cabin boy who actually did survive the wreck, and a girl who was living in Kingston and went out to the lighthouse with her father. And I started writing and I was doing some research, and I couldn't, it wasn't working. And then the characters actually told me, because characters do quite often tell me things, that I was doing it the wrong way around. So it ended up that it was a girl who was on the Admella and a boy who was living at the lighthouse with his family. So I'm going to go in and talk about those 2 parts of the story in a minute. The other 2 things that became really important to the story as I was doing the research were the pygmy blue whales, who I'll tell you a little bit more about, that come down through around the South Australian coast, past the Limestone coast and through into Portland. And also horses. And I do say to children, why would there be a horse in a story about a shipwreck? And we talk about how horses had to be transported. And indeed, there were 6 horses on the Admella. One of them in particular who was quite important. So he became part of this story. And those 2 characters became the way that I wove the 2 timelines together, because we've got one timeline in 1960 and one in 1859, and they needed to be able to be connected as one story. So just this book is I write for middle grade, older middle grade and younger YA, young adults. So I generally write for sort of 10 to 14-year-olds. A lot of adults read my books and really enjoy them, particularly the historical novels. And that's because I remember being a child and a huge reader and how important books were to me, and that concept of not being able to see myself in books. So I usually include characters that have some sort of chronic disease or mental illness or who are neurodivergent in my stories, but that's just part of the fabric of the story, not the point of it. And I'll tell you a little bit about how I did that in this story in a minute. And also because I like reading middle grade. I love reading middle grade and young adult novels myself. I read adult novels too, but I really like and enjoy those stories. So the way that I work is generally to get some sort of idea. So I had that idea about the 2 timelines and the 2 different parts of South Australian history. And I'm very much a history nerd. I get very inspired by things I hear on the radio or that I read. and then usually go and do some research and start doing some writing and then get more ideas and do a bit more research, and it kind of goes all over the place until we get to editing, and then there's lots and lots of edits to turn it into a finished book. So being able to use the library, I mean, I could use the library anyway, but being a fellow of the library, I had some money to support me, so I had that time that I needed to be able to write the story and do the research. But it also felt really special. It felt that I was connected to the library and that I was doing something in conjunction with the amazing librarians that are here. So I did all sorts of different research. I did a lot of searches on the State Library catalogue from my home office, and then was able to select the different resources that I wanted and come in, and the amazing librarians will have been burrowing down in the bowels of the State Library, which is a huge place full of so many resources, and just have them nicely waiting there for me at the reading room. So I spent quite a lot of time in the reading room. I also found books and reports and maps and letters and diaries, and I wasn't just looking for the obvious things. I was looking for things that would help me build the world, because I had two distinct timelines and I needed to get the background correct as to what it was like in Adelaide in 1859 and what it was like at Port Adelaide, and then what it was like at Kingston in 1960 and so on. So I did quite a lot of quite out-of-the-box searches for information that helped me to build that world, as well as obvious things around the lighthouse and around the ship. I used also other online resources like Trove and searched for articles. I was able to find a recount of the SS Admella that was written shortly after the wreck and download the full story so that I could follow along what happened and get the facts correct in terms of what happened on the Admella. And I also found books. So some of the books that were in the library, I thought, I want more than just sitting in here reading it. I need to have these in my library. So I was able to, I found this book about the wreck of the Admella, which helped me to then verify the other resource that I had to make sure that I had things correct, because there are discrepancies between different versions of what happened on that wreck. And then there was a couple of things as well about Cape Jaffa that I found in the State Library that I went online and found myself and was able to purchase those to put into my library. So it was helpful in that way as well. I did some expert interviews with different people. So in particular, I found a man through the History Trust down in Kingston, who actually his father was the head lightkeeper in 1960. And he had gone out and stayed at the lighthouse. So I was able to interview him and get a real feel for what it was like to be a kid living in Kingston in 1960 and travelling out to that incredible lighthouse. And then we went on a research trip. And this was I was able to do that because of the fellowship, but also a grant from the South Australian History Trust. So they also gave me a grant to support that research trip and to help me with a little bit more of the drafting of the story. So we went to Mount Gambier, to Kingston, to Portland, to Port MacDonnell, and I was able to go to all the different maritime museums and the sites where these events happened. Although I didn't travel out, you can travel out to the remains of the jetty where the Cape Jaffa Lighthouse is, but I get terribly seasick, so I didn't go out there. So when we went on that research trip, has anyone been down to Kingston? People been to Kingston? And anyone been to Port MacDonnell? And the amazing maritime museum that they've got there. We were started in Mount Gambier because the shipwreck trail starts there and takes in that whole limestone coast. And Mount Gambier actually had a role to play in the wreck of the Admella because that was where the telegraph station was. And so when the two guys that eventually did make shore had to walk something like 20 miles to go to the Cape Northumberland Lighthouse to get him to ride a horse, and then something went wrong with the horse. I can't remember exactly now. But eventually the message got through from Mount Gambier to Portland, where the only lifeboat was, that they needed to go and try and help these people who had already been on the wreck for quite some days. So we went to Mount Gambier. The sign there is that if you've been to Port MacDonnell, there's a whole series of signs of all the various shipwrecks that have happened along the limestone coast. That's me there at the Portland Maritime Museum, which we had a book launch there when the book came out, with the actual lifeboat that rescued the people from the Admella. And then there's a plaque there overlooking the beach where the ship was wrecked a mile out from shore. So we were able to go down onto that beach and stand and look at the beach and know that this is where, which was very emotional, the shipwreck happened. And that's actually at Carpenter Rocks. So that's where the ship was wrecked, nearby that beach. So that was an amazing trip. We also went to the Millicent, actually, because Millicent's got a really good museum and library too, and they had a few Admella relics in there. And I went down to the Port Adelaide Maritime Museum because they've got a few things in there too. Lots of time in museums, which I really enjoy. So when I would come into the library and collect those items, some of them may not have been relevant. So I could tell very quickly, no, that's not of interest. But I was looking at things like, how did they manage asthma in 1960? Because one of the characters has asthma. And did they know anything about learning disabilities? Because one of them has dyslexia and dysgraphia. And the answer is no. They didn't know anything about those things really. And maps. So I needed to know what North Adelaide was like. So I was looking at the history of North Adelaide, the history of Port Adelaide, how they would have gone from North Adelaide to Port Adelaide by car, how long that journey might have taken to get onto the Admella. I was looking at people's letters about their journeys from England to here in that period of time and what it was like when they arrived in Adelaide, so I could get a bit of a feel for what that was like as well as all the different bits and pieces. The Century of Service one was a really good resource that I wouldn't have found anywhere else because it was about the Kingston primary school, and that's where my children went to school, and so I was able to find out all these little things about the fact that the school had just been painted, or all these historical things that really helped me to build that world in the time of Maxwell, who's the character in 1960. So we have these two timelines, and so we have two characters who we hear from their point of view. And Maxwell and his sister Rosemary, as I said, they live in Kingston. And Maxwell has dysgraphia and dyslexia, and that's because I have a couple of sons who live with dysgraphia, which is a handwriting learning disability and processing information. And my husband has that as well as dyslexia, and I wanted to represent that in this story. So he, in 1960 at school, gets bullied and he wants to be like Gerald Durrell. So if you know Gerald Durrell, he really is fascinated by him and wants to be a naturalist, wants to write books, but thinks that he can't because he's not very good at reading and writing. He's very, very smart. And his sister Rosemary has asthma, and she's treated as a little bit of an invalid when she's actually really tough. And as well as diabetes, I have asthma, so that was part of that. So when I interviewed the guy who used to travel out to the reef with his dad, I'll show you a photograph in a minute, but when it was low tide, even though they were 5 miles, so 8 kilometres out to sea, there was the jetty, the tide would drop low enough with all the limestone rocks that they could jump down from the jetty and they could forage on the rocks in the middle of the ocean, which as a kid must have been incredibly exciting thing for them to do. So I found out that they were doing those sorts of things. So I was able to build that into the story. And then obviously in 1960, the horse Jupiter who was on the Admella is no longer alive. So when Maxwell and Rosemary are out on that jetty with their dad at the lighthouse, he starts to hear a horse, which he finds a little bit strange after they find a horseshoe. So it's actually the ghost of the horse Jupiter who connects the two timelines together. And Moriarty the whale, I've got my Moriarty down the back there, my soft toy, which the kids love when I go out to schools. He is in both timelines too. So he's a very, very young whale in 1859 who the people on the Admella see, and a very, very old whale in 1960. And he has a few of his own sections in the book, which I've done in verse because of the fact that whales sing, and pygmy blue whales have a very unique song. They have their own song. So he has some connections through the story. So as I said, the Cape Jaffa Lighthouse was 5 miles offshore. That's an old photo of it when it was on its jetty. And if you've been inside it, you'll know that they lived in that little tiny little dwelling part at the bottom. There was a storage shed at the back. And you go up inside that metal strut part in the middle, up the spiral staircase. I've got a photo in a minute, to go up to the lantern room. And then the lantern's up the very, very top. Now, this was a first order holofocal dioptric prismatic Fresnel lens, which means it was the top best lantern that you could get in a lighthouse. And it's the same light that's in that lighthouse today, and they do occasionally light it up. They lit it up for us when we were there, which was pretty spectacular. They started working towards the end of 1868, and when they went out and surveyed, the guy that went out thought it was a very calm day, and the guy thought, oh, do this in a year, this is easy, we're going to get this done. They finished it in, where have I got this? Somewhere here, 24th of January 1872, because it definitely was not calm, it was wild, and they were drilling down into limestone reef in the middle of the ocean in the 1870s to build a jetty, to build a lighthouse to put on the top. So it was an incredible process of doing that. In the beginning, keepers would be out there with their families as well, so they may have had 4, 5, 6 children, and both keepers would have had their wives and all their children. And when they got to the, they called it the basin, so they would come out and they had to not crash into the reef. They had to line up the legs of the lighthouse to make it look like it was one, and then they could navigate through those rocks and get in. And that way they were able to avoid getting smashed up themselves. But then they had to get into a dinghy because they couldn't go in the cutter that they'd come out in and get in the dinghy. And then there was a 20-foot ladder they had to get up. So the women were coming up in their long dresses with their babies, and then they were hauling everything up onto the lighthouse. And sometimes they got stuck out there for weeks and weeks if it was very bad weather. In 1960, the keepers would live 2 weeks at a time. So it would be 2 weeks on the lighthouse and 2 weeks back on shore in the keeper's house. And originally they had the keeper's houses built sort of opposite. If you've been there and seen at Cape Jaffa, there are ruins. You can go and see the original ruins of the lighthouses, the lightkeepers' houses, so that they could stand on shore and do flag waving and things because they didn't have radios. But by 1960, they were living in Kingston because they had a radio. Now, those radios, however, were put away at night, and then they weren't brought out again till 9 o'clock in the morning. So overnight, the keepers were completely on their own if something went wrong. So in 1974, they moved the lighthouse. So the government decided they were going to decommission it in 1973, and people advocated to save it, and they took it apart and brought it bit by helicopter back into town and reconstructed it, which is also quite an incredible feat. And the people that look after it down there are so passionate. They absolutely love their lighthouse and the history. So it's been a museum now since 1976. So all of this kind of went into the background of what happens for Maxwell and Rosemary in that part of the story. So you can see there at the top the low tide, and you can see how high the reef is actually showing, so that the kids could come down, and you get a better view of that jetty. And down the end they've got their pulleys to bring things up. This is going into the lighthouse on land and going into those spiral staircases. And there's your big, beautiful lens. It looks like a beehive, I think. And then you had a couple of bedrooms. The keeper's bedroom had the blacked out window so they could sleep during the day. So the keepers had to pump the kerosene every half an hour overnight and crank the light every hour. So it ran on like a pulley system running down through that tunnel to the living quarter area with a weight. So they had to crank it back up to the top, and then it would slowly move down. As it moves down, it rotates the lantern. So it was a very long night for the keepers, and then they would take it in turns of doing that and sleeping during the day. And when they weren't doing the light, they were very busy doing a lot of painting and also doing all the weather recording and other maintenance sort of jobs that they had to do. So moving on to the Admella timeline. So I've created obviously fictional characters in both timelines, but as I said at the start, I was going to use a real person, George Ward, but I decided to create Daisy and her sister Marigold. However, in this timeline, there are a lot of real people. So a lot of the real people who were on the Admella turned up in my story. I've obviously made decisions about how things play out in the narrative. But I wanted to be true to what happened because it's such a horrific thing, and it's important that history was true to what happened. So the timing of what happened in a series of events is correct. So they live in North Adelaide. They're reasonably well-to-do. They live up in the higher part of North Adelaide, and they travel down to Port Adelaide, or what they called it, Port Misery. And does anyone know why they called it Port Misery? Yes?
Well, they had to wade in, didn't they, through the mud and stuff from the boat.
Yeah, because it wasn't really well thought out. And so they couldn't bring the big ships all the way in, and it was the mangroves and the smell and the mud and everything else. So, but Daisy and her family are going on the Admella. So they're getting onto the Admella. They're going to Melbourne. It was a very fast ship. It had done a lot of trips. And she doesn't really want to go on the boat. She's not keen on boats. Her only memory is of when she was really little and she came over from England, which was not fun. And when you go to the Maritime Museum here and see the conditions that people were in, you think you can understand why. She wasn't keen on that. And she wants to be a botanist. So she's really fascinated by plants, but she's worried she won't be able to travel. And that's what she really wants to do. And so I, as I said, used the true history of that story. Now, in reality, on the Admella, there were 113 people on board. There was also copper and flour down below, which actually helped to stabilise the ship as well. And then they had 6 horses. So there were 3 race horses going to run in a race in Melbourne. And it was an inter-country, I think there were New Zealand horses and a few other horses coming. And there was a gentleman who had bought 3 horses and he was taking them back to his property in Melbourne. And she had a beautiful saloon, which was quite fancy, and everyone was really confident. And there was meant to be 3 lifeboats, but there were only 2 on the boat that day. So that first night, around about midnight, they hit the reef near Carpenter Rocks. And that beach up the top is actually the beach where the survivors would have been standing. And when you can see the big breakers out there about a mile offshore is where the ship was wrecked. So it was the worst, they say it was the worst maritime disaster in South Australian colonial history because of not necessarily the loss of life, although a lot of people died, but because of the horror that they went through in those sort of 8 days that they were stuck on the ship. So the ship broke into 3 parts. So you had the front and the back of the ship and the midship, which sunk fairly quickly. And people were clinging on to this slowly sinking parts of these 2 ships, two parts of the ship. They didn't know at first, obviously, what had actually happened to them, and it was dark, so they couldn't see till morning where they were. But they were constantly wet, so there were big waves breaking over them all the time. They had very little water or food, and they were freezing cold. And so over that period of days that they were there, they saved 23 people out of 113 in the end. And no women and children. So my character is a fictional character, but it's a middle grade story. So I have to try to build that tragedy in a way that children could actually access it as well. So these are just some of the things off of the Admella. If you've been to Port MacDonnell Museum, they've got an amazing model of the ship. So one of the things I spent a real lot of time on was working out what was it like on the boat. And I had to really dig around to find how would they move around, where were the companionways, where were the rooms, what were the cabins like. They had a series of drawings there, plans of the ship, and I also found some of those at Portland. And so I was able to work out how people moved around the ship. This guy at the top, Captain Forthrop, is the captain of the lifeboat that saved the people. He's an amazing man. His grave is in Portland. Some of the bells, that's me again with the ship, being very excited because the lifeboat, because I was at the real lifeboat. So the whales, the reason why I put the whales in there is because in all of my stories I like to include nature, history, mystery and magic, as I say to kids. And nature is one of my absolute passions, and the environment. And so there are animals in all of the stories. So in Legend of the Lighthouse Moon, the sea lions are really, really important. In this one, it was the whales. So one of the things that I found when I was in the researching in the library were a series of studies that had been done about the pygmy blue whales. So I was able to see where they'd been feeding and where they'd been travelling, and was reading all these papers and scientific things from biologists and people who were marine biologists and people who were investigating the whales. So the red dots was a study that they did. You can see all the different places that they're feeding, and particularly down when they get around to Portland. They evolved from true blue whales. So they're an Australian-specific blue whale. They're not really much smaller than a blue whale. So you can see they can reach up to 24 metres and weigh 90 tonnes. So they're still pretty hefty whales. They live a long time, but we really don't know how long they live. And they are endangered as well. They're slightly different colour, and as I said, they have their own unique song to other blue whales as well. So he became a really important part of the glue of the story, so that I can also then, it's a good kicking off point for me to talk to kids about whales and about the endangered pygmy blue whales. One of the reasons that they come down there and do that feeding, and this again came out through my research, I had no idea about any of this until I was able to look at some of the resources in the library, was that I found out about the Bonney Upwelling. So some people here probably know about this. They have a big festival, the Bonney Upwelling Festival down at Portland or somewhere down there. And this is a phenomenon where the nutrient-rich cold water is drawn up to the surface of the ocean, and this brings a lot of food for the whales and also other animals as well, like sharks, seals, sea lions, tuna. And so this means that they come down so that they can have a big feast, basically. And so it's a really important part of the ecosystem for these whales. And so this was another part of one of the things I found in my research in the library, just showing the different temperatures of the water and the changes of the water. So you can see how cool it is around here when there's an upwelling. And so this is actually a good bloom of something in the ocean that's important for the animals that live there. So after all of that research trip and being in the library and reading and thinking and writing and editing, I published, my book was published by my publisher, Breveted Press, on the 28th of January. And then we were able to go down to all of those regions and visit schools and libraries and launch the book. Did talks in all sorts of different places, and that's me with Alison Stilwell from the Lighthouse in Cape Jaffa. And that's me actually at Cape Jaffa itself, and been going out and about and talking to kids, particularly this month when it's book week. So we were able to actually come up with a finished product from my fellowship, which was very exciting for me because I wasn't sure if I would achieve that during the time, but I did. So I'm just going to do a little reading, and then we can have some questions. And I just changed my glasses, which is so many glasses. Now I can't see you, but that's okay. All right. So this is in Daisy's chapter 3, North Adelaide to Port Adelaide, Friday the 5th of August 1859, and they are already in the cart on their way down to Port Misery, and I'll go from there. There seem to be a lot of public houses along the way, Papa, Daisy said. I've counted 4 so far, "A man can get mighty thirsty, miss," the driver said as he pulled up at the old halfway house. The horses bent their heads to drink water from the scooped-out trunk of a gum tree, positioned at just the right height. "Those chestnuts are working hard," Papa said. "They're not the only ones," the driver muttered. "Pity it's too early for a nobbler." "What's a nobbler?" "The grown-ups are talking, Marigold," Mama said. "It's not a conversation for you." The ride became even bumpier, the potholed road now bounded by paddocks of sheep and fields of golden wheat. During the next hour, as the cart drew closer to the port, Mama kept Marigold occupied by telling her a long story in which her ragdoll Annie played the starring role. Daisy thought the adults were looking forward to their impending journey until she noticed one of the other passengers, Mrs. Ramsay's, hands tightly clutching the drawstring bag in her lap. The sight of her pale face didn't help Daisy's nerves, and her palms began to sweat. She forced herself to focus on her mother's gentle voice. On the final mile, the road became boggy again. The cart's wheels were in danger of getting stuck, but the driver managed to encourage the horses to keep forging onwards. "Goodness, it's hard going here," Papa said. "The road's built across mossy ground along the top of a large embankment," the driver told him. "Not sure they considered how hard it would be for fellows like me." The horses dragged the heavy cart through the stinking mud, snorting with effort as they slowly made their way to Company's Wharf. Despite the early hour, the wharf was bustling. The driver pulled the cart to a standstill near the two-storey custom house. "Time to get out," the driver said. "I've other passengers to be collecting." "What's that smell, Papa?" Marigold said as they alighted from the cart and collected their baggage. "It's even worse than it was in the city," Mama said, waving her handkerchief in front of her face. "It's got an ashy scent, along with the rotting smell," Daisy said, "with a touch of fish." "This whole port is built on mud and mangroves and the prosperity the shipping brings," Papa said. "Look, there's some diggers." He pointed towards a group of rugged-looking men who just alighted from the Candia. "I should ask what news there is from the goldfields. It's important to stay informed, especially now I'm running the auction house." "That would be very interesting if we had time," Mr. McGarry said. "However, I think the Admella is about to begin boarding." "Come on, girls," Mama said, taking Marigold's hand in hers and following Mrs. Ramsay towards the gangplank. The Admella loomed in the slowly rising dawn, sitting elegantly alongside the wharf. "I like her crown." Marigold stared up at the carved figurehead, whose tiara had been fashioned on stalks of wheat. "I do too, Marigold," Daisy said, then turned to her father. "Papa, what's that black tower I can see on deck?" "It works like our chimney at home, Daisy, but on a ship it's called a funnel, and it draws the coal smoke out of the engine room. While the Admella does have sails, she's faster under steam, especially when there's not much wind." Daisy placed her carpet bag on the wharf and gripped her mama's free hand. Her stomach churned with nerves while overhead sailors climbed the rigging, preparing the Admella to set sail. "You're going to be fine, Daisy," Mama said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Think of it as a grand adventure." "That's what I'm trying to do, Mama." "There's Mr. Rochfort," Papa said. "I must go and thank him. You coming, James?" he asked Mr. McGarry. "Rochfort helped me secure a cabin for my family, and I believe they're in high demand." "Have you got Annie?" Marigold asked Daisy as they moved closer to the gangplank. "Safe and dry in my bag." Mama said with a smile. "Did I hear we have a stowaway?" "She would have been lonely without me, Mama." "It's okay, Mama, I don't mind," Daisy said. "I had a little space in my bag." "Perhaps Annie can help you choose your new doll then," Mama said with a smile. Above them, at the top of the gangplank, the captain welcomed each passenger on board the ship in a deep voice. The hairs on Daisy's arms began to bristle as the line grew shorter. "It's nearly our turn," Marigold said. "There's a girl with a buttercup yellow dress like mine," she added, pointing to a tall woman with 2 young daughters and 2 sons. "I know you're missing your papa, but everything is going to be all right," the woman said to her youngest as she wiped a tear from her cheek. "And I've been on a ship before and know it to be perfectly safe. Try not to worry." "She's brave," Daisy said, "travelling on her own with children to care for." "Mothers are used to taking care of their children in all manner of circumstances," Mama said. "It's something you girls will discover when you have your own." "If I have any," Daisy thought. "Might be difficult when I'm on adventures." "I'm brave already," Marigold said. "That's because I'm 6. "You are very brave, Marigold," Daisy said as she walked up the gangplank, her boots tapping. "We both are." "Daisy, exciting news for you. Mr. Rochfort says there are horses aboard," Papa said as he caught up. "If a horse can sail to Melbourne, so can I. Adventure and heart," she whispered, and taking a deep breath, she stepped aboard. So that's just showing a lot of the research that I was doing around North Adelaide and Port Adelaide and how did they get there and how long did it take to get there in a cart and what other things might have been happening at the wharf and what did the ship look like and all those sorts of things woven into Daisy's story, but also staying very much in her head around how nervous she is as well. And Mr. Rochfort and the characters that are there on the cart with them were actually real people who were on that ship. So they start to come into the story as well. So questions about anything at all? Anyone got any questions? Yes. Yes.
We're very interested, both you and I, in the horses.
Yes. Oh, actually, I didn't go into that. Yeah.
We think that there was some that swam ashore and actually one that went on to race in Melbourne.
Yeah.
So can you...
Yes, I missed that. Thank you. Yeah. So there were 6 horses. So Jupiter is important because originally there was rumours that Jupiter was the reason that they hit the reef, which was later decided wasn't actually the case. And that's because not too long out of Port Adelaide, Jupiter fell over and it took a while to right him. So while they did that, they turned the ship into the ocean so that it would stay stiller. And they got the horse up and then people thought, then maybe they drifted off course. But later it was said that no, that didn't happen. It was just that it was dark and it's a very treacherous part of the coast and, they drifted. But so Jupiter became important to me because of that. Yes, most of the horses died. Two of them swam ashore. And went on to run in a race. So that's correct. It was 2 of them. Jupiter didn't. Two. Not Jupiter. Jupiter died. Yeah. I have to go back into my notes to see which 2 it is, but I can, if you want to, I can send you that information. But yeah, so 2 of them did survive. And through the story, it might even be in there, I'm trying to remember now, but there were 2 horses that turn up on the beach. The 2 guys that eventually, they made multiple attempts to get, when they hit the reef and realised what was going on, one of the lifeboats actually got broken by falling masts, etc. The other one, they were trying to get it down to use it and somebody had undone the rope too quickly and it fell into the ocean and got taken away. And then they tried to make various rafts and different things, and a few people attempted to make shore and died. And then they made a makeshift raft, and 2 of the sailors did get ashore, and that's how they ended up getting rescued, because then they went to the lighthouse and that whole series of things happened. But it took days then for anyone to be able to get to them, because every attempt they made, it was just too dangerous. The waves were too big, the reef was too dangerous. Different ships made attempts and couldn't get into them. So that was why they were stuck there for so long. So the people that are trying to save them are on the beach knowing they can't get to them and hearing their cries, and the people on the boat can see them and see their fires, but they can't get to them. So it was really, really difficult. But yeah, so 2 horses.
Was that the first voyage that you had done?
No, she'd done quite a few to Melbourne and was known to be quite fast and reliable. Yeah.
One other thing about the incidents. Thursday night here, there's a talk on blue whales in the upper. The National Geographic Society.
National Geographic. Oh.
It's Peter Gill who's done a lot of research.
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah. Well, it's really important. And of course, everything that's going on at the moment with the ocean and all the rest of it. Yeah. And the horrible flu that's coming for them.
Leading on from what you were saying about horses, you mentioned why the ship shipwrecked. Do you have some theories? I've heard several different hypotheses. I'm a sailor. I'm interested in navigation. What do you think is the reason that the ship shipwrecked?
There are differing stories about it. And as you said, nobody really knows except the people that were there. And even they may not really know. I mean, the weather was bad. It was dark. The coastline is notoriously difficult to navigate. I think in my theory, it was just an accident. It was just one of those things that happened. I mean, ships wrecked all the time I can't tell you the technical reasons why, but there are a few different theories around the navigation.
I'm wondering if you've heard the theory that they had a really bad fire the previous year, and a lot of the trees had burned on the hillside. The captain was experienced. He'd done this coast.
Very experienced, yep.
And when you're sailing that coast, you do sextant sights, and you sight on it, and he had been sighting on that hill. But but because that hill had been so badly burned, he was actually sighting on a hill that was further away and taller, and that.
So they came in closer. Yeah, that's possible.
Because of his navigation, because so I don't know if that's really true, and there,
No, I don't know if.
there actually was a fire, but I think that would be, to me, that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely, the landscape down there is changing all the time. One of the things we did when we went on research trip was went to a talk with, I can't think of his name, but he's a geologist and he's amazing. And he was talking about all the changes to the limestone coast over the centuries with the different ice ages and the shifting of things, and that it's limestone, you know, it's soft, it moves and it changes, the shapes of things change. I mean, it's entirely possible that that was what happened. I didn't come across that myself, but yeah, it's possible that's what happened. But yeah.
What time was the ship supposed to have struck the wreck?
It's around about midnight.
So then it would have been very, very dark.
Yes.
It had lights anyway. So one of those things that always happen.
Exactly, and there was bad weather as well, and they didn't know even where they were or what was really going on until the sun came up, and then they could see the position that they were in. And I mean, that happened all the time. So many shipwrecks along that coast. Yeah. Yeah, I did a lot more planning with this story in terms of the building of the world, because I obviously had to do so much research to make sure that these two historical time periods were correct. And I had a plot line for the Admella because I was following exactly what happened over those 8 days. But I was still building it all really just out of my imagination. And I'm not someone that writes it all down and plots it all. So kind of the characters start to take over the story and take me in various different directions. But yeah, I was just really grappling with writing it. And then it's sort of like the characters say to me, oh, hang on, I think maybe I'm on the ship and I'm on the lighthouse. It sounds weird, but that's how writers' brains work sometimes. That then I thought, oh, maybe I'll play with that. So I changed over the characters and put Daisy on the ship and put Max at the lighthouse, and it felt right straight away. Yeah. And I think it was good having a passenger telling the story on the ship rather than the cabin boy. However, he still factors into the story because she has she has a friendship with one of the boys that works on the ship, who comes from that cabin boy. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming along and listening to me. If anyone's interested in the book, I'm going to go down the back or just wants to come and have a chat, because sometimes I know people like to chat one-to-one rather than asking questions. I'm going to be sitting down the back there too. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.